Okay. All right. Can you hear me?
Yes, hi.
Good. Great. Hi. Great.
Hello,
Okay.
everyone.
Just a second. Okay. Good. All right. Hi. Hear me? Yes. Yes.
Yes, hi.
Good. Great. Hi. Great.
Hello,
Okay.
everyone.
All right. Should we start? Are we ready to start?
Yes. So thank you, Geshe, again.
Mm-hmm.
After the weekend, it's also a continuum. It's very good.
Uh-huh.
And
We
thank you,
can
everyone.
hardly hear you, Shir.
Sorry. Thank you, everyone, for joining. And thank you, Geshe, for teaching us. Again, if anyone wants to contribute and to practice Dana, to support the teacher and the activity of Dharma Friends of Israel, I pasted in the chat a link you can use to contribute. And thank you, Geshema, and excited to have you again.
Okay. Great. All right. Well, thank you for that. And let's start as usual with a meditation. Oops. With a meditation. Well, one small remark. Well, we do one meditation where I ask you to visualize the Buddha and the great other masters of India in particular, because we're studying texts by a great master, great Indian master. And why I ask you to visualize this is not just to imagine, just visualize something that is totally unrealistic, but to also remind us of the fact that these beings are still around. Now, the continuum of the Buddha, the mental continuum of the Buddha, the mental continuum of these great masters, they haven't disappeared, except these beings manifest in different ways, but their minds are still there, and the realizations, the attainments they have reached, well, they've probably added to them if they've already become enlightened. Either they've already become enlightened or they're more highly advanced than they used to be. So this is not just visualizing something that is totally unrealistic, but as I said, these beings are still around and still inspire us, but we need to make a connection to them. And so just visualizing their presence is one way to connect to them. And then at the same time, I'll ask you to visualize, and they're depicted in so many different ways. So I won't give any description. You visualize them in whichever way you want. Most important is that you get a feeling for their presence. But I also ask you to visualize them as one with your spiritual teacher, like a fully qualified teacher, like His Holiness the Dalai Lama or His Holiness the Karmapa, and so forth. So anyone you connect to on a spiritual level who is a highly realized being. And if you visualize those great beings, like Buddha and these Indian masters, to be of one nature with your own teacher, through your teacher, you receive the full benefit of the wisdom of these great beings. So this is why we're doing this. It's psychologically, it has a great effect on the mind, and therefore this practice is done of visualizing those masters in front of us. So just to remind you. Okay, so then let's start with a few moments of mindfulness of the breath, and then I'll lead you through the meditation to set your motivation. Visualize in the space in front of you Buddha Shakyamuni, who appears in the form of a fully ordained monk. With great wisdom and compassion, smiling at us. Think that the Buddha is inseparable from your own personal Lama or Lamas, if you have more than one spiritual Lama. And then surrounding the Buddha are the great Indian masters, starting with Nagarjuna, Ayadeva, Asanga, Buddhapalita, of course Chandrakirti, and so forth. And just as the Buddha, they're inseparable from your personal spiritual Lama or spiritual Lamas. And then visualize that you and this visualization of these masters in front of you, all of you are surrounded by all sentient beings, for whose sake we're here to study and contemplate the Dharma. And then think it is for the sake of all these sentient beings, it's for their welfare that today I will listen to and reflect on the words of Chandrakirti in order to become a fully enlightened Buddha, which then enables me to take all sentient beings to that same state. So while holding this motivation deep in our heart, let's recite the prayers. I go for refuge until I'm enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By the accumulation of merits of practicing generosity and so forth, may I become a Buddha to benefit all sentient beings. I go for refuge until I'm enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By the accumulation of merits of practicing generosity and so forth, may I become a Buddha to benefit all sentient beings. I go for refuge until I'm enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By the accumulation of merits of practicing generosity and so forth, may I become a Buddha to benefit all sentient beings. And then the four immeasurables. May all sentient beings have happiness and the causes of happiness. May all sentient beings be free from suffering and the causes of suffering. May all sentient beings never be separated from happiness that is free from suffering. And may all sentient beings abide in equanimity, free from attachment for friends and hatred for enemies. Okay. So if you can, try to keep the visualization with the great beings who are all of one nature with your own teacher, your own spiritual teacher, right in the space in front of you. And likewise, of course, hold on to this motivation for the sake of all sentient beings. We're here today to study this incredible scripture, this incredible work by Chandakirti. All right. Now, well, last week we've completed the two verses that are part of the fourth chapter, of the entry into the middle way, which mainly focuses on diligence or enthusiasm, and joyous enthusiasm. And last week I asked you to make that the focus of your practice as part of this. Now this week we'll move on to the next chapter. And again, of course, the main kind of state of mind that is part of our practice, should be part of our practice all the way through, is bodhicitta, the mind of enlightenment, driven by great compassion. And I'd like you to, well, for this lesson, as well as next week, all of next week, just continue making an effort. Don't let go of the mind of enlightenment, even if it's just the uncontrived, the contrived version of it. It's not yet the actual mind of enlightenment. Maybe it is, but even if it isn't, it doesn't matter. Just continue familiarizing yourself with that mind. However artificial it feels, it doesn't matter. Just keep on generating it again and again. But moreover, for this week, the focus is on concentration. And for concentration, in order to generate more concentration, you need, well, what's called mindfulness. Now, I want you to, for this week in particular, put your focus on the practice of mindfulness, which, well, actually consists of three mental factors or three mental functions. One mental function is introspection, which basically means to observe your own mind. Observe what's going on in your own mind. And in order to do that effectively, you need attention and you need mindfulness, which mindfulness really means recollection. Literally, it means to recollect. So, what do you want to do? You want to be aware, you want to be attentive of what's going on in your mind. So, to be focused on what's going on, mind and body. And to start your day, well, in the morning, you should do mindfulness in the sense of concentration, to do meditation, single pointed meditation, choosing an object, well, preferably the image of a Buddha. And if you have a hard time doing that, well, take the breath. Okay, well, maybe it's a good reason because you have a hard time doing it. Choose the image of a Buddha. So choose that which you find harder. Anyway, if you do that, you start the morning with mainly focusing, having set your motivation, of course, bodhicitta, the mind of enlightenment, very important to be ready for the entire day, but also in preparation for your meditation. And then you meditate however long you'd like to. Meditate on, well, engage in single pointed meditation. That is stabilizing meditation. And thereafter, throughout the day, to pay specific attention to your mind and, of course, to the actions of body and speech that arise from your mind, that are motivated by your mind. And in that way, practice mindfulness. That is, those three functions should be present in your mind at all times. Attentiveness, recollection of what you want to do. That is, being attentive, paying attention to your own mind. And of course, for that, you need introspection. Introspection, attentiveness, and recollection. So recollection is needed to bring your mind back, to remember what you're here to do, what you want to be aware of. Of course, you need to do other things throughout the day, but since we can multitask, most of us can, there's not much difficulty involved in like doing your ordinary tasks, do whatever you have to do, but at the same time, try to put more emphasis on mindfulness. If you not already doing that, you may already practice mindfulness in that way. But if not, this is in particular your homework, if you like, for this week. All right. As part of what we study this week, well, which is the 5th chapter of the entry into the middle way. So the 5th chapter is called Hard to Conquer, hard to overcome, hard to conquer. And it'll become clear why this is explained. Why is it called that? So if you remember, the first ground, the first bhumi was called the joyful one. The second, the stainless one. The third, the luminous, the radiant. And now, hard to conquer, hard to overcome, hard to conquer. So this has 2 parts. The first part is explaining the name hard to conquer. Why is it called that? So the etymology of this name. And then the second part is why concentration is preeminent. Of the 6 perfections, or even 10 perfections, but we're more familiar with the 6 perfections. So the 6 perfections, concentration is preeminent. Why is that? And also what it also explains is how practitioners on that level become well versed in the truth, in the Four Truth. All right. Now the first part, the etymology of the name of the 5th ground. So in the text, in Chandrakirti's text, it's only 1 verse and it's divided into 2 parts. Yeah, great. It says first, this great one on the ground of hard to conquer cannot be defeated even by the entire host of Maras. Okay, those 2 lines explain why is it called hard to conquer. Well, what can it not be conquered of? It cannot be, or conquered by, it cannot be conquered by the Maras. Mara. Du Du in Tibetan, or Maras, or sometimes it's translated as demons. They're just, well, demons is, well, I guess you could use that word, but demon doesn't really mean demon in the sense as we usually understand it, as in like some kind of ghost-like appearance or ghost-like being that would, well, harm us, would disrupt us. Well, here in this case, there are actually 4 types of demons or 4 types of maras. One is the mara of afflictive emotions. One is the mara, or I should start with the first one, the mara of the aggregates of mind and body. The mara of this present mind and body we have right now, not just mind and body in general, but the mind and body we have now, which is an afflicted or which is a contaminated mind and body. Our mind and body right now is the result of our basic misconception and other afflictive emotions. That is the mara of the aggregates. Then there's the mara of the afflictive emotions. We're all familiar with those, at least to some degree. Misconceptions with regard to how phenomena exist. There are different types. So those are maras of the afflictive emotions, as well as afflictive emotions such as anger, aversion, hatred, attachment, craving, jealousy, and so forth. That's the second mara. And then there's the third mara, which is the mara of death. Sometimes it's described as the Lord of Death. It's not actually a sentient being. It's not a being at all. Although it's referred to, it's kind of described as a person. It's not a person, but the reason it's described that way, it's like a dictator, like a cruel dictator that can take away everything you have. So death is like that. It can take away everything we have, everything that is dear to us, everything that's important to us, and most importantly, our own life. The most precious thing we have is our own life. Well, I keep saying that, like most precious thing. Well, actually, of course, our mind is the most precious thing, and the positive potential that is left on the mind, that cannot be taken away. But other than that, our life, our possessions, our near and dear ones, we're separated from them by way of death, through death. So death is therefore like a cruel tyrant, which is why, and very dominant, as very powerful ones, because having the power to just tear us away from everything, which is why it's described as the Lord of Death. And that is one mara, one demon, the demon or one mara of death. And then lastly, the mara of Devaputra, it's explained. So these are kind of like non-human entities that can actually, well, I guess also human entities, anything like external beings who can actually harm us, who can hinder us in our practice. So these maras are all aspects, they're all hindrances, they all, well, yeah, they refer to hindrances to our practice. Having this mind and body, of course, we don't have anything else. That's the vessel we have. We have this mind that we transform. Okay, it's this mind as a basis and this body that serves as a vessel. And we need to take care, especially of the body well, because, well, we need to keep it healthy and strong. However, nonetheless, it's also an obstacle in itself because, well, yeah, not wanting to practice, like feeling aches and pains everywhere if you sit down to do meditation, to meditate. And with the mind, of course, it's not pliant. It's like it's not very flexible. You're not mindful enough. There's not enough concentration. We get bored of analyzing and so forth. So in that sense, although we utilize it, that's all we have. You utilize the mind. You can't take a pure mind and then utilize it. Well, then what would be the point if it's already pure? It's like when you do exercise and you want to get a flexible, strong body, you take this limited body in order then to transform it and have a very flexible and pliable and strong body. Now, the obstacle to having such a strong and pliable body is the body itself being stiff and weak and so forth. In the same way, body and mind that's all we have, but in a way they're also an obstacle. So that's described the obstacle of mind and body. So as part of our practice, we transform mind and body, and we transform this obstacle, this Mara of mind and body, of the 5 aggregates. Secondly, of course, it's pretty obvious that the afflictive emotions, that they're an obstacle. Of course they are. We can utilize them into the path. There are explanations where you use them in the sutric system as well, but in this tantric system, even more so when you transform, for instance, attachment or desire into the path. And here's again similar to using the mind that is not pliant, using the body that is, well, stiff and not able to sit for a very long time, to transform it. And through the power of concentration, for instance, you generate not only a mental pliancy or flexibility, but also a physical one that causes bliss in the body, bliss in the mind, bliss in the body, and transforms mind and body in such a way that now you can meditate with ease. That's part of one-pointed concentration. It's also part of the union of calm abiding and special insight. Once you reach that level, you will be able to generate a special flexibility, a special pliancy, again, of mind and body, which enables you to meditate much smoother, making it much easier to sit for long hours and be focused on, well, in the case of union of calm abiding and special insight, on the path, with the object being emptiness. All right. So therefore, the Mara of the aggregates, the Mara of the afflictive emotions, where either you transform them or in the sutric path, much more not transform them, but rather reduce them and eventually totally eliminate them from your mind. And then there's the Mara of death, of course, which is an obstacle. It's also an obstacle in that, well, being in samsara, again and again, we die. And of course, we can't avoid it, and we should utilize it to practice and all that. But in actuality, it's an obstacle because every time we die, well, we need to start all over again. Once we're reborn, we take another birth, hopefully as a human being, but nonetheless, we have to start over and over again, 9 months in our mother's womb. Thereafter, learning how to eat, learning how to walk and talk, and going to school and getting an education. So there are years and years before we can actually go back to our practice. If we're a Buddhist practitioner, well, it takes quite some time until the mind is mature enough, until we're ready again to continue with our practice. That may be earlier, that may be later, it depends. But the point is, death, every time it disrupts this process of practice, and therefore it's seen as a Mara. And then, of course, there's the Mara, the Deraputra, which in the text usually says, for example, it gives the example of certain, well, celestial beings who are explained to, out of jealousy, may actually create obstacles for us if we have a connection to them, or I guess other beings as well, other living beings creating an obstacle to us, not liking us to engage in practice and being an obstacle. Excuse me. So therefore, those are hindrances that we face on a daily basis if we engage in the practice of the Dharma. Afflictive emotions is a big one, but of course, mainly our mind and body. Those are huge obstacles, obviously. Afflictive emotions too, death. So you can see the gravity, like the degree to which they prevent us is reflected by their order. So the worst are mind and body in general, because the mind, of course, involves everything that is wrong with our mind, but more specifically, the afflictive emotions. Thirdly, death, and then external forces. So they're the least of a problem. Okay, so having explained those, then on the fifth ground, hard to conquer means on the fifth ground, a bodhisattva has become so well trained, as in like his practice, his or her practice of generosity, ethical discipline, forbearance, joyous enthusiasm or joyous diligence, and concentration have having become preeminent, having become surpassing, much greater, much more superior to the practices of someone who hasn't realized emptiness directly yet. And here in particular, there's no longer any disruption. So previously, I guess you could say there's still more disruption by these maras, but here you can no longer be defeated. It's not like you've overcome the maras yet. No, that hasn't taken place yet, but you cannot be crushed. You cannot in any way be conquered in the same way or disrupted in the same way as you used to be able to be disrupted by the maras. All right, so that's special on this level. And then the next two lines, the heading for those two lines is how concentration is preeminent and one becomes well versed or becomes versed in the truth. Excelling in meditative absorption, it says, and in the truth of the wise, he, the bodhisattva, he or she gains mastery in refined understanding as well. All right. Now here, as already mentioned, concentration is the perfection that's preeminent, that's surpassing. And on top of that, also it is said that with regard to the truth, so the four truth in general, it is said, but also the true truth, actually part of that, but mainly the four truths. So the four noble truth in the sense of the coarser ones and the subtler types, and the different aspects as well, which means the Four Noble Truth, of course, can also be explained from the point of view, well, of a Hinayana practitioner, but also a Mahayana practitioner. So from the point of view of attaining enlightenment, there's also a truth of suffering, which is not being omniscient, having still hindrances to becoming enlightened, or in other words, no, still having the appearance of inherent existence, plus lacking omniscience. And then the origin of that, the origin of that kind of suffering is the cognitive obscurations, that which keeps us from becoming fully enlightened. The cessation of that, of course, is the enlightened nirvana, is the enlightenment itself, or the enlightened state. That is the cessation of cognitive obscurations, and the path is the Mahayana path. Therefore, having fully understood not just the Four Noble Truth as we know it, so Four Noble Truth, which were explained mainly from the point of view of a person aiming for liberation based on the fundamental vehicle. So, of course, as you know, suffering, the three types, the origin are the afflictive emotions, and so forth. There's the coarser and the subtler one. And then you have the 16 aspects. I don't need to go into those here. So there are coarser types and subtler types, and they're fully understood on that level of a bodhisattva. And therefore, so in addition to excelling in meditative absorptions, there's this deep understanding of the truth, of the Four Noble Truth, coarser and subtler ones, and therefore bodhisattvas gain mastery in refined understanding as well, in terms of their understanding of reality. Okay, now that's the fifth ground. I think that's enough. I don't think it's that hard to understand. It's only one verse, as you see. And I think it's time to now start the sixth ground. So now the most important part of this text, we'll start with this. Now, up to now, the first to the fifth chapter were based on Nagarjuna's Ratnavali, or Nagarjuna's Precious Garland, as it's also called. It's been translated into English by Jeffrey Hopkins, as well as by John Donne. The two translations, as far as I'm aware, there are two translations available in English. And the previous explanation was based on that, which is why this text, the entry into the middle way, is also described as a supplement. Supplement in that it's a commentary mainly of Nagarjuna's fundamental wisdom, which becomes clear once we start the sixth ground, because the commentary really starts now with the sixth ground. However, Chandrakirti felt it was necessary to supplement it with explanations of the method side. And of course, it makes sense that in our practice as well, we need to receive the method aspect of the teachings, whereas the fundamental wisdom explicitly does not talk about them, doesn't talk about love, compassion, and so forth. It rather talks about the emptiness of these aspects. So explicitly speaks about the emptiness of, well, the Four Noble Truths, the 12 links, and so forth. Implicitly, yes, it presents also these aspects. However, for the reader, that's not necessarily clear, which is why you have this type of text. Another text, of course, that's a supplement to the Fundamental Wisdom by Nagarjuna are the 400 verses. So the 400 verses, in the similar fashion, they also, in the first 8 chapter, describe, well, conventional truth, the conventional aspect, including bodhicitta, certain conventional misconceptions. And then with the last 8 chapters, then set forth, that is, present the fundamental wisdom in the form of a commentary. Here, this is done as well, however, in a slightly different way. The emphasis is not on certain misconceptions as well as bodhicitta as much as the as great compassion. Initially, the text starts off with great compassion, and then it goes into the first 5 perfections. And at the end, you have 4 further perfections, but they're not explained in as much detail, and they're also not considered as important as those 4 first 5. All right. So just that you know, we've actually completed an important part of this text, and now actually start with the commentary of the Fundamental Wisdom by Nagarjuna. Okay. Now, just briefly to remember, usually when we are in class, our teachers would over and over go over the beginning again just to remind us. So we don't need to do that. We don't have that many classes. It's only once a week, and it's up to you maybe to go over again what you've learned, to read through it again, to take time whenever you have time. In the Tibetan tradition, monks and nuns oftentimes take the scriptures they've already studied and either on their own make time, and every day they read through them. I mean, having memorized them, they either recite them by memory, or even if they've memorized it, they find it easier to have the text in front of them, so they read through it and they meditate on them. That's one way to be reminded to not forget the meaning and to also internalize it. Another way is through reciting it in a prayer setting, for instance. So when they do prayers on special occasions in particular, it is customary to cite, for instance, the entry into the middle way, and likewise to cite, for instance, Maitreya's ornament of clear realizations, or Abhisamaya Alamkara. Just again, because those are the 2 main texts that we usually study and they're considered to be so important. So recite them in this prayer setting. And you can observe monks and nuns, if they've studied the text and they're interested in doing so, they're very still and they try to meditate on each verse, which is a great opportunity. It's hard to recite the whole text on your own without getting stuck somewhere, unless you do this frequently. So in the group, it's much easier. If you forget a word here or there or the next verse, there's always the group that keeps it going. So in that way, the assembly kind of carries you, and it gives you the opportunity to meditate on the text. So that's something, of course, really important, because what's the point? Studying it and forgetting about it. What I'm doing is, well, of course, we also debate on it, and debating helps also in the process of not forgetting. At least, well, if you've memorized it, then if you repeatedly recite it, so you won't forget after some time. But also debating it helps, of course, to remember the meaning better. But What's most beneficial is, of course, if you meditate on it and bring it into your own life. And I hope you've been able to do what I ask you to do. In that way, you've already uh, at least done the first step of remembering easier, and of course, to really make it part of your own life, as I mentioned a few times. Now, as you remember, just quickly to remind you, what we've covered so far, we spent a lot of time on compassion. Chandrakirti, he praised compassion, he bowed to compassion in the beginning of this text. That's extremely important and very significant in that, well, significant and unusual as well. Significant in that, well, compassion, of course, is so important. We shouldn't forget that Dharma practice relies on the wish for other sentient beings to be free from suffering. Even bodhicitta, its basis is that. Bodhicitta is only possible if it's driven by this great compassion. And what's unusual? Well, it's unusual in the sense that usually you praise Buddhas, Bodhisattvas, the omniscient mind, and so forth. So to praise compassion, well, it's slightly unusual. Anyway, it talks about compassion being important when you start your practice, in the middle of your practice, and of course, even at the time of the result, compassion is so important. Besides bodhicitta and the understanding of emptiness. But again, those two have at their root, especially when it comes to the understanding of emptiness that eliminates whatever is in the way to become a Buddha. Well, all those bodhicitta as well as that type of wisdom have as their root, at their root, compassion. And how do I generate compassion? I generate compassion by understanding sentient beings are driven by the misperception when it comes to I and mine. And like a bucket on a water wheel, remember we had that little picture, we're like this bucket on the water wheel and like being easily falling into the lower realms, being uh, being being kind of thrown back and forth by our afflictive emotions and so forth. So first we understand this for ourselves to be true, and then understand how other sentient beings are in that same situation, and thereby generate compassion. Generating compassion and thereafter understanding also in combination with the fact that sentient beings are impermanent, that they lack inherent existence. So we have three types of compassion. Compassion that just merely focuses on sentient beings, the one that is combined with an understanding of the impermanence of sentient beings, and the one that is combined with the understanding of the emptiness of sentient beings. And then based on that, we started talking about the bhumis. So the first two paths, the path of accumulation, the path of preparation, they're part of this initial explanation on compassion, which includes generating, therefore, bodhicitta in order to fulfill the wish to benefit all sentient, or the wish for sentient beings to be free from suffering. And then you go through the path of accumulation, path of preparation, and reach the path of seeing. And that's the first bhumi with which this text started. So the first bhumi, the joyful one, where the main practice of the six perfections is generosity. And we had a lot of explanation on generosity, how important it is, how it's so effective, even with the wrong kind of motivation. Still, it still we yield the result. We reap the result of being generous. That it gives us what we need in order to practice. And it becomes so strong at some point that we joyfully give. If we just told, give everything away, this joy is so much greater than the joy of, for instance, a liberated being, just the possibility or the opportunity to give. So that's what we learned during the first chapter, which described the joyful bhumi. And then the second bhumi, the stainless bhumi, ethical conduct. That just generosity is not enough, but we need to engage in ethical discipline, in a non-harmful actions of body, speech, and mind, in order then to be reborn in the future with the mind, with the body, that of course enables us to continue on the Dharma, because just affluence and enough wealth to be able to practice is not enough. We need to have the right kind of mind and body. So extremely important. And now bodhisattvas on that level, they're totally free from any unethical behavior of body, speech, and mind. And then the next chapter is the luminous, which describes forbearance. Again, extremely important, the kind of patience. We talked about it, not getting angry, how important it is not to get angry, how it doesn't make sense to get angry, how it's harmful, in fact. In particular, we get angry with bodhisattvas, and we just never know who's a bodhisattva or not. And again, we talked a lot about the qualities of patience, tolerance, and acceptance. And then the next chapter was the bhumi, or the bhumi of radiance, called radiance. This deals with enthusiasm, joyous enthusiasm, joyous effort to enthusiastically make an effort, to be diligent in one's practice, and then concentration. So what we discussed today. And now, of course, very important, wisdom, because the other ones without wisdom, they benefit us to a certain degree, definitely bring more happiness in this life and future lives. However, won't be able to take us further than a better rebirth. Other than that, liberation is impossible, and definitely enlightenment. No way can we reach any of those two lasting goals, liberation from samsara, or even greater full awakening. No way can we reach these states without wisdom, which is why there's a very extensive explanation now with regard to wisdom, and even more important, its object, emptiness, selflessness, emptiness, from the point of view of the Prasangika. Now, this is also important as part of this text, because as we heard, that the entry into the middle way is a supplement to the fundamental wisdom. But what's important, actually, there's a distinction between supplementing the fundamental wisdom from the point of view of the method aspect or the vast aspect, and the profound aspect. So from the point of view of method and wisdom, not only does Chandrakirti's entry into the middle way supplement Nagarjuna's fundamental wisdom by describing the method aspect, or the vast aspect, as it's also called, which refers to, just mentioned, great compassion, bodhicitta, generosity, and so forth. But it also supplements Nagarjuna's fundamental wisdom by way of the vast aspect. Because, for instance, the fundamental wisdom, what it doesn't do, Nagarjuna's text does not specify that he's talking from the point of view of the Madhyamika Prasangika school. In actuality, he is, but there's no passage that specifies that. And therefore, there may be the misapprehension that Nagarjuna's text can be explained from the point of view of the Svatantrika Madhyamika, or even the Chittamatra school. Even that uh, is possible for someone to misunderstand it in that way. And therefore, Chandrakirti supplemented the fundamental wisdom by Nagarjuna, also by explaining that this text is from the Prasangika school point of view, by way of refuting the Chittamatra and refuting the Madhyamika Svatantrika, and even some non-Buddhist schools. So it's this process of refuting certain views, and in that way presenting the Prasangika school. Now, this is not done to denigrate, to belittle another philosophical system, not at all. It is actually done for our own benefit, as in, like, these kind of debates, they're kind of set forth in the form of a debate and a dialogue back and forth, in some cases assertions by another person, and then the response by Chandrakirti, just explaining why this doesn't make sense, and then a response again, and it's like this back and forth in some verses at least. This serves the purpose, not, as I said, just for the sake of belittling, deprecating, just refuting another system, but it's rather to help us gain a deeper understanding, because these views that the other schools hold, we do too. We do too. Well, sometimes we already have those views, we're just not aware of them, or even if we're aware of them, we don't really do anything with them. Or as part of the process of understanding, learning about emptiness, we take on these views where we may understand, yeah, phenomena don't exist independently of the mind, but they still have to exist inherently. The sense, oh yeah, they still have to exist inherently, which would be an explanation not from the point of view of the Prasangika, but the Svatantrika. And so these debates, they help us to reflect on our own mind and reflect on our own perceptions, and to allow ourselves to go, does this other system make sense to me? And we'll find, surprisingly, that sometimes assertions by other masters, by other schools that are considered to be lower, make sense to us. And that is a beautiful process, because then we realize, oh, I'm actually holding that view. I wasn't aware of it. But since I find it makes sense, well, I'm holding a view that is here refuted. So now I should pay attention. Therefore, this is really all meant for us to recognize either conscious or subconscious views that we hold, well, consciously or subconsciously, that we may have never put into words. A lot of these views we hold, we never put them into words, we never discuss them with anyone else, but they deeply influence us in our day-to-day dealings, in our emotional responses. It's amazing how our mind does its own thing. If you watch your own mind, it's really interesting when we don't pay attention, in particular. When we pay attention, at least we become aware of it. And at some point, we also learn to control. Well, what learns to control? Of course, there's no separate I, but there's a type of mind that through mindfulness, through introspection, and so forth, is able to control other aspects of the mind. But before we really learn that, if you watch your own mind, our mind is a creature of habit. I mean, a creature, it's not a creature. It's like this, this saying, like we are creatures of habit. But really what it means, our mind is a creature of habits. If someone says something, we listen to that, we understand what they say, and then there is a response. And usually it happens on its own. We get upset or we get pleased. Usually it's like a misconception that influences our response, and we have a certain thought, a certain reaction gives rise to a certain afflictive emotion, and sometimes also to positive emotions, of course. But it's like just habits. It's just this entity. Our mind works on these habits. And Buddhist practice, really what it is recognizing these habits and distinguishing between those habits that actually harm us and those that benefit us. With regard to those that harm us, well, becoming aware of them and then applying their antidote, reducing them, and strengthening the qualities we either already have or generating new qualities that previously we haven't had, new habits, positive habits, I should say. So it's all a matter of generating new types of mind, but turning them into habits. Because if it's a type of mind you generate only once, it's not a habit. Well, it's nice you've had that moment of bodhicitta, but if you haven't made a habit of it, well, it won't rise again, not on its own. You have to make an effort. But habit, what's great about habits, well, depends on positive or negative habits. Negative habits, the problem is what's not great about them, they just arise all the time. And unless we learn how to control our habits, we learn to reduce them, they just do their own thing. And our lives are lived in an uncontrolled fashion where possibly anger, attachment, envy, jealousy, they're at the forefront, influence our actions, and create so much suffering for us. So for our mind, creating so much suffering for the mind. And now Buddhist psychology, Buddhist practice is all about, as I said, first of all, recognizing these harmful habits, and now recognizing them and doing something or applying means to break these habits, trying to break these habits. How do we break these habits? With new habits. which is why, so habit just means familiarity. How do we do that? Well, through a different form of familiarity, which is meditation. Meditation is just another word, or actually literally means in Tibetan, means familiarity. Familiarizing ourselves with positive habits, which means that's the point, not just meditating on love, not just generating love, I should say, as part of a meditation, but meditating on love, which means familiarizing with love as an antidote to anger. Now, the stronger our love towards not just one person, the people we're attached to, and so forth, but towards all sentient beings, the harder. So, if we make a habit out of it to generate love for all sentient beings, our habit of getting angry with sentient beings is no longer able to exist. That is, the habit grows weaker at first, and eventually this habit gets lost. And that's the process of Buddha's practice of replacing our old habits with new habits. Okay, now having given all that explanation with regard to how the mind works, as our mind being a creature of habit, well, what we need, of course, is wisdom. We need wisdom as part of this process. And therefore, an understanding of reality, because our habits were created by misapprehensions, misconceptions of reality. This is why we now study the sixth chapter. The sixth chapter, which is called, here it's called the Manifest. That's the name Thupten Jinpa gives, but actually it's got kind of two names. The Tibetan words are very similar. I think. Yeah. So the manifest, or even better, the approaching. The approaching. Okay. So in English, those words are not similar. The manifest, the approaching. Now, with regard to here wisdom, or the understanding of emptiness, the understanding of selflessness as part of this process of habituating our mind. Why do we need to understand emptiness or selflessness? Because our habits were formed by misapprehensions. That is extremely important. Any emotional response is usually created by a certain rationalization. We rationalize, we have certain rational thoughts, ideas about situations. This is why I usually say getting angry, which is an emotional response to a certain situation, does not happen without a reason, in that our mind naturally applies a kind of reasoning, and that's not correct reasoning, but still it applies this process of this person said such and such. How dare they say so? We don't get angry upon hearing what the other person has heard. If you watch another person, it's quite interesting. If they get insulted and previously they were smiling, they hear these words and their smile is still there. For a while, it'll remain, it'll be there, and then slowly the smile changes because the person is thinking about what they've just heard. How dare they? So they hear these words and then it registers. Oh, they're saying that to me. How dare they saying that to me? They have no right to say that. Who do they think they are? Or whatever is the reasoning. And then as a result of that, we respond with anger. Quite interesting. It's true for everything. Attachment, the same thing. We'd only grow attached to another person because we reflect on his or her qualities. Oh, this person's so nice. They make me feel so good. I can show my real inner self. I can just be myself. I can just be. I'm not making fun of that. I mean, seriously, this is usually the process. It makes sense. Oh, I feel so much better. I can bear my other problems. It's this process of analysis, why this person is attractive, why this person is in any way desirable. And only once I do that, and of course I have a sense that this pleasant feeling that they create within me, that's something, that pleasantness comes from their side. They are pleasant. I'm actually just labeling pleasant on the basis of all this analysis I did, and of course on the basis of how I felt. Although actually first I feel a certain way, and then I start analyzing that, and I start labeling, oh, pleasant person. And then before long, I believe this pleasantness was not labeled by my mind. No, it's within that person. And now I want that person. I don't want to be separate from this person. Now you see how there's been a rational process that took place that, although it doesn't accord with reality, but this ability of the mind to analyze, it's there right from the beginning. It's there at all times. We're calling that thoughts. We're calling that thought processes that constantly take place. So this constant, oh, it's like this because it's not correct reasoning in all cases, but it has that aspect of it's good because I want this because I hate him or her because, etc. Now we need wisdom to replace that irrational, this rational or mistaken rational thinking, if you like, this thought process, to replace it, as it's also described. I mentioned that before, I believe. I called it afflicted wisdom, to now replace it with a non-afflicted wisdom, with actual wisdom. And that wisdom, the root of that, of course, is selflessness, is emptiness. But along with that, because things don't exist on that ultimate level in and of themselves, objectively and so forth, that also explains why they're changing, why things are changing, why certain things are not in the nature of pleasure, why certain things are not pure, and actually give us this lasting satisfaction we look for, and so forth. All right. Now, having said all this, let's start with the etymology. Okay, cancel. All right, so now starting with the sixth ground, the 4 parts. It has 4 parts initially. So these are the outlines set forth by Lama Tsongkhapa. First, again, you have an etymology or an explanation of the name, the manifest, or the approaching. The approaching is really explained here, that name. So the etymology of the name of that ground, and why, what is this preeminence of wisdom? Why is wisdom preeminent? Why is it surpassing here? All right. Then the next part, I won't tell you the next part now because, well, when you get to the verse, it's easier to remember when you get to the next part. But the first part, as I said, is the etymology and the reason for why wisdom on that ground is surpassing or preeminent. Okay, so on directly facing. So Tuptenjima explain. It can also be translated. The Tibetan word ngundu choba can also means directly facing, approaching, or directly facing. So directly facing, as in like getting closer, directly facing. You're moving towards it, or approaching. Some people translate it as approaching, or directly facing. When you walk towards something, you directly face it. So it has also that connotation, aka the manifest. So he also calls it that. So here there's a bit of a indecisiveness as regard to what you call it, because both translations kind of work. In the other chapters, it's much more decided, or just it's much more kind of set forth or determined what to call the bhumi. Anyway, so we've got the manifest, the directly facing, or the approaching. So why is it called directly facing or approaching? Because the Bodhisattva abides in the mind of meditative equipoise and turns to the attributes of perfect Buddhahood. This Bodhisattva, who sees the truth of dependent origination, attains true cessation by dwelling in wisdom. All right. Now, directly facing, which means facing, approaching Buddhahood. That's why it's called that. Right here, turns to the attributes of perfect Buddhahood, moves closer. Of course, on the other stages, you do too, but here specifically because of wisdom. Without wisdom, no way could we move closer to Buddhahood, because we need wisdom to eliminate what's in the way to gain Buddhahood, to reach Buddhahood. That's not true for the other perfections. They don't eliminate anything. They help in that process. They help in the process of generating the wisdom, which then can eliminate. So wisdom is a mind that eliminates something from the mind. It's actually understanding the opposite of what we usually hold on to. It's for most of you, this process is quite clear, but just for those for whom this process is not clear, let me just say this much. Maybe I already talked about it last time. I don't remember. I remember saying it, but I don't remember when I said it. So, in general, as you've heard, our afflictive emotions, every state of mind, we have that keeps us within cyclic existence, that is responsible for our suffering, that is an obstruction to attaining liberation or Buddhahood, has its root in the basic misapprehension, misconception of reality with regard to perceiving phenomena to exist objectively, inherently, or independently. All of them have their root in that. For some misconceptions, it may be hard to understand initially how the misconception of perceiving that which is the nature of suffering to be in the nature of pleasure, how that goes back to this basic misapprehension, how holding on to permanence goes back to that. You learn that as part of this process to understand. It makes total sense. If you have that basic misconception, you have all the rest, all the other problems, all the other misconceptions, and of course the afflictive emotions. So, understanding this much, the root is that this misconception gives rise to all the other problems we have, to all the other afflictive and harmful states of mind, whether misconceptions, whether emotional responses, whatever they are. That being the case, it kind of makes sense if I eliminate that misconception, well, eliminate everything else. And yeah, that's the case. If I eliminate that misconception, if that's the root, that's like cutting the root of a tree. If I cut the root of a tree, I get rid of the trunk, I get rid of the leaf, I get rid of the fruits. And how do I cut the root of a mind that holds on to independent, objective existence? Well, simple. With a mind that understands the absence, the non-existence, the impossibility of such inherent, objective, independent existence. It's as simple as that. So all I need to understand that is that the object of this root misconception doesn't exist. Impossible. Okay, so the example I often give is like you believe there's some ghost underneath your bed, some demon, ghost underneath your bed. As a kid, I think we all remember, if you believe there was something in your closet or there was something under your bed, the best way to remove that misconception is to check, look for it. Is there really a ghost? Is there really something? And if there isn't, well, then you're certain you've seen it for yourself that there's nothing there, then that misconception disappears. You understand it's impossible, in other words, for there to be a ghost. And once you understand that, there's no longer a misconception and there's no longer all the emotional response to that, like fear, etc. So same idea here. You need to generate a mind that understands it's impossible, that totally understands with full focus, directly experiences the impossibility of such existence. And when you do that, you can actually eliminate that misconception. However, since it's so deeply ingrained in the mind, you can only first eliminate a coarser type of misconception and then the subtler types. They're deeper ingrained in the mind. So it takes some time. It's not like this mind that believes there's a ghost underneath the bed that you've maybe had for a few hours. So it's easy to eliminate it, or maybe for a few years. But this is something we've carried with us since beginning this time. So it's deeply ingrained in our mind. Anyway, the point is, this takes time to eliminate. But the way to do this, it's a long process, This is why Buddhist practice takes a long time. But we need to start somewhere. And understanding, of course, is the first step, knowing what direction to go. So wisdom. We need wisdom. And for that wisdom, to develop that wisdom, we need to understand the object, which is emptiness. And once you have an understanding of emptiness, a direct experience, in particular on this level, when your wisdom becomes preeminent, you're directly facing, you're actually approaching Buddhahood, the attributes of perfect Buddhahood. So you abide in the mind of meditative equipoise. There's a special equipoise you generate, a special experience of emptiness, which is responsible for you approaching Buddhahood. And this bodhisattva who sees the truth, therefore, of, well, emptiness, dependent origination, attains something called an absorption of true cessation by dwelling in wisdom. Okay. Now, it's a little bit hard, this aspect, what's so special about the wisdom on this level as opposed to other wisdoms, being therefore called or deserving to be called approaching Buddhahood, whereas all the other ones, you're also approaching Buddhahood. Of course, you're moving closer, but here in particular, there's special emphasis on getting closer to Buddhahood. It's a little bit difficult. I remember debating this a lot to really understand this. It doesn't seem that special what happens here, but to just explain you what is explained in the commentaries. Now, what, for instance, Lama Tsongkhapa says that once you reach that level, previously you became well versed in the coarse and subtle aspects of the Four Noble Truth. So on this ground, you attain a full realization of the Four Noble Truth. Coarse and subtle. Coarse and subtle is important. So you have a full sense. It's not just your wisdom of emptiness, but a complete sense of full realization, a complete realization of the Four Noble Truths, not just the coarser ones and not just the coarser ones, but also the subtler ones I mentioned before, which includes the cessation, Buddhahood, and so forth. And you also are well versed in the 12 links, the forward, the sequential order, the reversal order, a full realization in that, which you've also attained as previously on the previous stage. You attain an understanding of those. If you have a full understanding of the Four Noble Truth, you have a full understanding of the 12 links. So Lama Tsongkhapa mentions that kind of knowledge, that full realization, which is special on that stage. But what's also mentioned in the commentaries is that you attain a special absorption. It's called the absorption of cessation. That's a little harder. It's the independence on the highest concentration, the peak of samsara, the 8 concentrations I mentioned previously as part of the explanation of forbearance. I talked about 4 formless concentrations or formless absorbed, 4 form absorptions and formless absorptions. And the highest formless absorption is called peak of cyclic existence. So this is this deepest concentration, very subtle mind. When you independence on that, what the bodhisattva does is he or she withdraws all coarser minds. So it's interesting because it's not like in Tantra where you talk about coarser and subtler levels. Here we're talking about it in a sutric way. And even in a sutric system, you have the explanation of coarser minds and subtler minds. It doesn't really talk about what they mean, but I guess it's just the ordinary coarser types of mind. Sense consciousnesses withdraw, as well as the coarser mental consciousness, that's withdrawn. And you generate now a type of absorption that takes to mind emptiness, withdrawing all coarser types of awareness. So you have a subtler type of mental consciousness taking as its object emptiness. So it's absorption of cessation. It's called absorption of cessation, but what it actually, the cessation is just of non-dual, of dual appearances. So it's free from any dual appearance, which it was previously too. So it's just the name here, cessation. It's really just saying it's a deeper type of equipoise or absorption. And it creates an incredible balance in the body, and mind. So where all the elements in the body are in complete harmony. This is called the absorption of cessation. That's, you attain that on that 6th level. And all this accounts for the fact that on that level, you attain surpassing wisdom. All right, now that was a really long explanation. I didn't expect it to take that long, but as it is to be expected anyway, it's explaining the 6th ground and it needs a lot of explanation. Actually, we start the 6th ground, really the 6th explanation of emptiness starts with verse number 8. So until 6, we have some preparatory, but for the next class, for the next lesson, we'll smoothly go through it because it doesn't require more explanation. The most explanation we needed was on the 4 maras and, of course, on this absorption of cessation that I just described. That is usually not described neither in the Lamrim or in other texts, and it's a little hard to find some explanation on it. Anyway, having said all this, I'd like to do some meditation. But what are we going to specifically do as part of this topic? Well, I'll just summarize a little bit of what we've done, starting off with mindfulness meditation, which is anyway what you're supposed to do for this week. I didn't take any questions. Let me check if there's any question posted. No, there's no question posted. And if you have questions, maybe just keep them for next time. There's also you have this discussion group, so maybe they can be addressed in that group. Sorry, I just went a little bit over time today, so there's no time for questions, and I definitely want to meditate. So we'll do some mindfulness, and I briefly talk about the maras, and then go a little bit into wisdom, and of course finish with bodhicitta, so that we've covered everything I talked about today in the meditation. Okay, so let's start then with some breathing meditation. So the thing that bodhisattvas are no longer conquered by on the 5th ground are the 4 maras, are the 4 demons. Which are a huge part of our own life. As they're hindrances to our Dharma practice. The first are our mind and body, which is described as the Mara of the aggregates. Since the present mind and body we have lack pliancy, lack flexibility, which is why we need to transform mind and body. In particular, the mind. So it's important to understand that our worst obstacle are our present mind and body. Which is why they're also described as pervasive conditioned suffering. since they're the basis of the suffering and the suffering of change. But then from the point of view of the origin of our mind and body, it's the afflictive emotions, which are the second Mara, the Mara of the afflictions. Which includes the misconception of reality, which is the root of all the other afflictions. And it includes, of course, all the afflictions such as anger, attachment, envy, arrogance. And then the third Mara is the Mara of death. Since again and again you have to leave behind our mind and body and start all over again. Which therefore it's a obstacle to our practice from that perspective. And the least severe hindrance to our practice are external factors. Which we often identify as the worst obstacle. And which, not to forget, are of course the result of our inner karma. And to overcome these four maras, we need to generate the mind that understands reality on its deepest level. A mind that is able to eliminate the root misconception of reality. And thereby eliminate afflictive emotions, the Mara of the aggregates, the Mara of death, and the external forces that act as an obstacle to our practice, the Mara of Devaputra. But of course, generating that wisdom is not done for our own benefit, but for the benefit of all sentient beings. Who, in terms of numbers, are far more important than we ourselves as one single person. Who are helplessly under the control of the four maras. And in contrast to ourselves, either have no knowledge of the Dharma or no interest whatsoever. And thus, right now, no means to merely reduce the four maras, let alone overcome them. Countless sentient beings suffer from the mara of the aggregates. Having a fragile and limited mind and body, experiencing endless troubles, endless problems with these aggregates. Driven by the mara of afflictions, anger, hatred, attachment, desire, greed, and so forth. Life after life, being thrown into different existences, growing attached to their present body, and again having to die. Getting killed, dying of old age, dying of sickness, or possibly through taking their own life. And due to the karmic actions they unknowingly accumulated, they experience the Mara of Devaputra, that is external harm from different sentient beings. And therefore, let's conclude this meditation through generating the strong wish, the affectionate determination. May all sentient beings be completely free from these 4 maras. And may I therefore attain the fully enlightened state of a Buddha. Generate the wisdom that eliminates my own obstructions, and thereby enabling me to lead all sentient beings to liberation and even Buddhahood. And now holding on to that wish, that aspiration, let's also dedicate whatever virtue we've accumulated here together as a group through studying and contemplating Chandakirti's words. May all this virtue not get lost, but ripen in our own enlightenment for the welfare of all sentient beings. And may we also ripen in the way as described by Shantideva's dedication prayer. Dedicate towards all those suffering right now who are sick. For instance, Tali Lubin and all other people you know of who are sick. Let's dedicate the merit we accumulated for their quick and total recovery. May all beings everywhere, plagued by sufferings of body and mind, obtain an ocean of happiness and joy by virtue of my merits. May no living creature suffer, commit evil, or ever fall ill. May no one be afraid or belittled with a mind weighed down by depression. May the blind see forms and the deaf hear sounds. May those whose bodies are worn with toil be restored on finding repose. May the naked find clothing, the hungry find food. May the thirsty find water and delicious drink. May the poor find wealth, those weak with sorrow find joy. May the forlorn find hope, constant happiness and prosperity. May there be timely rains and bountiful harvests. May all medicines be effective and wholesome prayers bear fruit. May all who are sick and ill quickly be freed from their ailments. Whatever diseases there are in the world, may they never occur again. May the frightened cease to be afraid, and those bound be freed. May the powerless find power, and may people think of benefiting each other. For as long as space remains, for as long as sentient beings remain, until then may I too remain, to dispel the miseries of the world. Okay, thank you very much. Now, having finished with bodhicitta, let's continue this entire week again and again. Replace all your negative habits with this most powerful of habits, the habit of bodhicitta. Generating it again and again and again. You're making a habit out of it. That's the only way to generate it, or to make it stable and replace it with the negative habits. And of course, on top of that, practice concentration throughout this week. Well, in your morning meditation, evening meditation, single pointed meditation, and throughout the day, mindfulness, the way described before, with attentiveness, introspection, and recollection, bringing the mind back again and again to the object of being in the present. Okay, great. A little bit over time, so let's finish it here. Have a great evening, and see you again next week.
Thank you.
Have a good practice. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Geshe-ma.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye
Thank
bye.
you.
Bye.
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 Thank you.
Thank you. Tell my friend.
Bye.